Bonjour Nathalie Bondil, merci beaucoup d'être avec nous. Thank you very much to be with us today. So maybe we will start by the big question. Who are you? Could you introduce yourself and say a bit about your career and so on?
Well, who I am, it's rather difficult to answer with all those discussions about identity. I would say that I have a multiple identity. I was born in Barcelona in Spain. I'm French, but I grew up in Morocco. Then I am also a Canadian citizen. I'm a French citizen. I feel that I am from Mediterranean, and I'm a citizen of the world. My career, in fact, is rather normal for a French citizen because here we need to pass the École nationale du patrimoine, the National School of Heritage. Donc, this is a unique way for being a curator. So I passed this competition after having done some studies in art history, obviously, at the École du Louvre. And then I became a national curator in Paris at the Cité de l'Architecture, close to the Eiffel Tower. Then it was not as obvious. I would say that I hesitated a lot before becoming a curator. It's not so easy. Obviously, now I'm 54 years old, so everything seems obvious and easy. But I would say that when I was a teenager or a young student, I did hesitate a lot about what I wanted to do. But this passion I had for museums, for artwork, for collection, remains very strong. And I would say that even if my father was against my choice because I wanted to do some art history, and he was a banker, and I never regret to have done this choice because it is truly a great passion for all my life. And even if you have some issues, this passion remains very strong, and I would tell you that choosing your passion as a work is like not working a day in your life. So just be loyal to what you want to do.
Right, so you were the first woman to manage the Musée des Beaux-Arts de Montréal. So how did it happen in your career?
Well, in fact, this gender question was not rather an issue when I became the Montreal Museum of Fine Arts director. So I was the first female director. I was 39 years old, rather young, but I was chief curator before. And I would say that I always say, well, I hope that I have been chosen because of what I had between my two ears instead of what I don't have between my two legs. So. It's true that in France, the whole system is very top-down. So you belong to an administration. I became a national curator after this very hard competition. Then I went to the Cité de l'Architecture, and I was a specialist in sculpture. But because I always wanted to travel, I had some experience, professional experience in New York. I did work for Sotheby's, for example, and I did work for cinema as a production assistant. I decided to also to have more experiences around the world. I love to travel, I would say. So I think that when I had this opportunity to go to Montreal, thanks to my former director and former teacher, Guy Cocheval, a famous art historian. It was just at the very beginning for 1 or 2 years, but at the end I remained in Canada for more than 20 years, and it has been a wonderful experience. When I came to Montreal, it was at the very end of the 90s, in '99. So I was a curator, then the chief curator, and then the general director. So at the very beginning, I was helping the vision of Guy Cocheval, the former director, who had a different vision, his artistic vision. When I became general director in 2007, it was many years after, and I would say that in between I realized many things. I learned many things thanks to this experience, this professional experience in North America, and especially the whole bottom-up system, the grassroots movement inspiration, which is very, very different with what I did learn in France in the national school. Because here the whole cultural system belongs to the administration. We all work for the Ministry of Culture. But when you are in North America or maybe in Australia, in other Anglo-Saxon countries, you belong to an institution which is supported by the citizen, by the social system. And this inspired me very much. And I would say that it has been a fantastic lesson for me, because I realize how we can interact, how we can co-create with the whole society. And so it makes your passion, it makes your job much more relevant and much more interesting, because you really work with volunteers, as guides, as members from the board, etc., etc. So the whole system is more horizontal. In comparison, in France, the system is much more vertical, top-down. So I would say that this experience has been really inspirational for me, even if I really praise the scholarship I had here in France, which is very good, very solid. But really, I love the system, and I think that it has been a great opportunity and a great luck for me. In Montreal, in Canada, and I would say in North America, the whole system is based on audiences. So you are really not implementing the vision coming from the Ministry of Culture, from the presidency. It's not a question of cultural diplomacy, thanks to the hierarchy, but it's really what do people need? How can we be useful for the people? How can we co-create something for them? And so it changes your perspective. You have a different glaze, because you really want to adapt your glaze towards the people, and you work for the people and with the people. And this is very different, because here, even if we all talk about democracy, how can we have a cultural democracy, because this is a dream for everybody, obviously, how can it be real? And I would say that in North America, because we have this constant interaction with the citizens, we are obliged to have a less vertical system, a more horizontal system for the power. I would say that the authority is more horizontal, because you have obviously the board, you have the executive management, but you have also the audiences. And we need to work all together. And this is why your question is always, every day, how can I could be useful? How can I be relevant for our society? Because the goal for any cultural institutions is to remain very strong in terms of scholarship, in terms of academic success. So this is a global stage, it's a global level, but also you need to be relevant on a local level. So this is what I say is to be global and local, not just one. level, but really having those two aspects. Because you need to be very strong on a global academic level. If you want to sell productions, for example, you need to have unique productions. But if you want that people come and see you in your city, your neighbor, for example, you need to talk to them. And so this is why you can't choose between those two aspects. I used to say that you cannot make a horse with a donkey. So the content is a key. And this content should be relevant on those two levels. Considering the best practices, I would say that there is no recipes. The best practices will be the one you will invent with your team, listening to your people and feeling what are the needs. It's true that when I was in Canada, in Montreal, which is a fantastic multicultural city, it is really important to take care about all those communities. I would say that in France, it's very different because even the name, the concept of community is different. The translation is different. The concept is different. Multiculturalism is different if you compare it with universalism, which is another very French concept. So I think that being in Canada, being in Montreal especially, has been a great privilege for me because it was like having two brains. One brain towards America, towards United States, toward the English community, but another brain towards Quebec, toward the Francophone community, towards France, towards Europe. And we had to juggle every day between those two realities, those two philosophies, and trying to find the main thing which can federate all those aspects. And this is a great luck for me because you need to handle the complexity of our words and and in fact complexity is reality. It's not a question of recipe, it's a question of being precise and being open-minded to different perspectives. And so this is what I try to do, especially towards diversity, towards inclusion, of course, education, togetherness, peace, those values which are so important for all of us. We are just... the museum was a great museum before me, and it is still a great museum after me, obviously. I think that what I learned is the capacity of a museum to be a social vehicle for progress, for the public, for the audiences. What I found very interesting when I was in Montreal is that it's not just a question of expertise, it's not just a question of doing your job. It's not just a question of being a good professional. What are the values you want to fight for? Like, what are those values? Because when you fight for strong values, for example, peace, everybody is for peace. Well, I hope so. And so it is the best way if you want to gather the whole community around you. Lawyers, doctors, whoever. We all want peace in our community. So if you choose, thanks to your professional tools, a great subject in order to defend those values, you will attract the whole community. And this is why I think that all of us, whatever are your tools in hand, we can work together when we struggle for the same values. And this is why, in fact, in Montreal, we had a fantastic success in terms of co-creation, in terms of partnerships. We had 450 partnerships with different associations, clinics, hospitals, universities. It is enormous because we're not just talking about artistry, we're talking about values. I'm very happy because in Montreal there are, I would say, 3 important projects for me. The first one is an exhibition I curated on Cuba. Cuba Art and History from 1868 to nowadays. It was an impossible project in 2008 because in 2008 it was not even possible between United States and Cuba to communicate. It was really before Barack Obama. And in Canada and in Montreal, we had great relations with those 2 countries. Because I have been invited by the director of the Museo Nacional de Bellas Artes in La Habana, it was possible to show this modernity, this unknown, fantastic modernity coming from Cuban artists. And when I made this exhibition in 2008 in Montreal, we had not only works from museums in Cuba, but also from France, but also from Germany, from different countries, and from United States. From the Met, Metropolitan Museum of Art, from the Art Institute of Chicago, from Florida, from private collectors from Florida. Can you imagine? They were not really for Fidel Castro. And the fact that we were able to gather those works coming from different owners in the same place in our museum was just magical. And it has been and it remains a great exhibition on Cuban art because everybody was federated thanks to art, thanks to this artistic community. It was really moving because some Cuban curators came for the very first time in Montreal, in Canada, in North America, and they were discovering fantastic works they just knew thanks to illustrations. But they were able to see those works from the MoMA in New York in reality. So that has been a strong example for me. Also, I learned that even when you have no money, you can do things. And frankly, I was really impressed by my colleagues in Cuba because they need everything, but they kept their passion and they still keep their passion for art and collection. And even when they didn't have any money for producing works or for producing events, they decided to do some services exchanges. And it has been a great lesson for me because just after, in 2009, we made another exhibition with Yoko Ono. And this exhibition was all about the Ballad of Peace of John and Yoko. So Yoko came to Montreal, and I had envisioned a great installation, a great exhibition on peace. Why? Because in 2009, that was the anniversary of the bed-in of Yoko and John in Montreal at the Queen Elizabeth Hotel. So the Lehman Brothers bankruptcy came very suddenly, fall 2008. And my general secretary told me, well, maybe it's not possible to make this exhibition, especially because I wanted to make this exhibition for free, without any ticketing. But for me, it was not possible to ask for any fee for this exhibition because it was a gift for Montreal because of this bed-in. And I remembered this lesson thanks to my Cuban friends, and I say, my Secretary General told me, or you reduce the exhibition scale, or donc you ask for an entrance fee. And I say, well, we should do like our Cuban friends, and so we should ask for service exchanges. And at the end, the scale of this exhibition remained the same, a big exhibition. Instead of asking for money to philanthropists, to sponsors, we gathered more than 40 sponsors around our project who gave design, painting, shipment, advertisement, etc., etc. So the result was extraordinary because at the very end, the total value of this generosity was more than $1 million. And I would say that it was even more interesting because Yoko Ono decided to make some haiku within the tube, the Montreal metro. And in fact, every day during 3 months, during the whole duration of the exhibition, she was talking to the people in the tube, thanks to some recordings. So it is absolutely unique. So this is what you can learn thanks to other experiences. After that, I would say that I've been very, very proud to have directed 2 main projects, the Pavilion for Peace, which contained international art and own masters from contemporary art, and the new wing for the one word, thanks to the philosopher Édouard Glissant from the Caribbean island, La Martinique. So you can see that those 2 projects, 2 important expansion projects, they have very, very specific name. The Pavilion for Peace and the wing for the one word. So it's all about values. It's not just to give the name of a donors or donor. It's really, the idea is really to support strong values. So I would say that are my great memories. Well, the Arab World Institute is a very, very unique institution. I'm very happy to welcome you here in this wonderful library made by Jean Nouvel, the famous architect. I think that this institution is very important because at the same time, it is important in terms of scholarship because people don't know about Arab art, donc the Arabic fine arts, I would say. Donc there is a lot of confusion between Islamic arts and Arabic arts, etc., etc. So this is important in terms of the storytelling of our modernities, not just one modernity, but our modernities, which is strangely unknown here, donc in France and in Europe, and I would say everywhere in the world, except in some countries from the Arab world. So we do have the duty to make it known. It should be told to any art historian. So this is a great challenge and a great pleasure, especially because all those relations concerning the Arab artists with France, with Europe, were very, very numerous during the whole 20th century to nowadays. So there is many, many dialogues that we need to tell, a lot of intercultural dialogues. Second thing, is the social impact of such an institution. The Arab World Institute is here to show different perspectives, different glazes around this very important word in terms of heritage, in terms of language, in terms of culture, in terms of art. And here in France, but not just in France, I would say, nowadays, we do not know enough. And so we need to tell those stories. We need also to enlarge our vision about what is the Arab word, not just thanks to the television or the newspapers. And this is a great duty, especially when, as you can see, there are a lot of manipulation because of politics, etc., etc. So we can really be relevant, important in terms of a political aspect. And for me, this is essential in terms of my motivation. You're right, and with Jacques Lang, it's the revolution every day. I like very much Jacques Lang because he's truly a monument man, if I can say. He's truly the permanent Minister of Culture during years and years of involvement. And he has a lot of courage. I would say that, for example, now we just opened a great exhibition about Jews of Orient from Maghreb and Mashrek, which is here. And it has been inaugurated by the French President, Emmanuel Macron, 1 week ago exactly. And this is very important because people would say Jews of Orient, Arab Jews, or Christians of Orient. Well, but in fact, it's all about those different religions which were born in the Arab world. And in fact, this exhibition, for example, like others, is the third chapter after the very first on Hajj, the pilgrimage to the Mecca. Second, Christians of Orient. And third, Jews of Orient. And the purpose of those exhibitions is to enlarge our vision, our knowledge about this incredibly ancient and rich history, which is our heritage. So I think that working with Jacques Lang on this aspect is very important because he has a lot of experience, so he is brave and he has very strong values. At the same time, he is a politician. So for me, this is different. I'm an art historian and a museologist, but he is a politician. So I learn about different perspectives and strategies. But I would say that working with Jacques Lang, it's also a fantastic opportunity for me. I would say that the main difference remains in the governance and in the budgetary system, because in North America we are really independent. Here we are all related to ministry, or ministers. So we are more administrative, but it's not a surprise for you. It's more top-down, but it's not a surprise. I would say that now we all gather same kind of values. North America or France, when I see this fall, for example, we have great exhibitions in France, in many museums through the territory. For example, the arts of Islam, one past for a present, in 18 museums through the whole country, thanks to the Louvre. We have this exhibition here on Jews of Orient. We have another exhibition on Picasso the Foreigner in the City of Immigration at the Palais de la Porte Dorée. We have very soon, 1st of December, at the Musée de l'Homme, another exhibition celebrating Josephine Baker with hundreds of great men and women coming from the immigration who made the history of France, the national history. So you can see that there is a shift in our mentality, which I think is very good, and in fact, which is not far from what we hear in different countries of the world. Not just talking about North America and Europe, but in different countries. I'm talking about America, I'm talking about Asia, etc. So I think that we're all on the same boat, certainly because there are global issues which concern all of us and your generation especially. And we need to find those keys in order to understand our common future. This is the reality of the one word, thanks to the philosopher Édouard Glissant. Everything is in the relation. I think that there are still some differences between some concepts. We would say diversalism with universalism, for example. There are interesting debates and conversations. But at the end, we are all animated by the same values. And this is what is the most important. Even if we find different tools, even if we use different tools, no, we are all going in the same way. So I would say that I'm rather optimistic. I must say I'm very optimistic because I can see how we can work all together. Of course, there are some discussions, sometimes too much polarization, and we need to find those frontiers which do not separate all of us, but those frontiers which are the place where we can meet each other. So this is very important. This is your duty, this is my duty, this is our duty. But I would say that I'm very positive and optimistic, especially when I see you, because I know that now, on a more global level, we all share and support the same values. Yes, it's a hot topic. In fact, I'm a little bit concerned by multiculturalism because I was in a country where multiculturalism is a very, very important value on the highest level for very good reasons. But at the same time, it can be a little bit dangerous because everybody wants to remain on his or her position. So there is a risk of essentialism. I do think that it's much more interesting to talk about interculturalism, to talk about debate, to talk about conversation, to talk about everything which is in those grays. Because the conversation is not so much in classrooms, but thanks to social medias, and they are black and white. The reality is much more complex. I like this sentence of Edgar Morin, a French philosopher, a specialist of complexity, and he says, the democracy is the organization, the deep organization of complexity. And in fact, the goal, our goal, is not to convince by strength the other, is to accept that we can live together with different ideas. But how can we invent a commune destiny? This is the most important. Beyond our differences, how can we envision the same destiny? Because this is the question. And your generation is very important because those debates about multiculturalism, universalism, etc., divide cultures, divides generations, and division does not lead to anything. Always important to find the door thanks to which you can communicate. Very important. So let's work together and try to find this common referential which can lead all together.
Okay, thank you very much. So I will open the conversation to everybody. So we start the questions. Who wants to start?
So the Arab World Institute has partnerships with each country from the Arab League, because in fact it has been created thanks to the Arab League. So we have partnerships on different levels, music, concerts, exhibitions, etc. We even welcome the Palestinian collection here at the Institut du Monde Arabe, because now there is no place for this collection, so it is hosted by our institution. So we have partnerships not just with countries from the Arabic world, but also from different countries in Europe, in North America, I would say a little bit with Asia, Singapore, not really with South America. But the mission of this institution is really to have all kind of partnership. I would say not just abroad, but also here in France. The action, the educative action is very, very strong. We do have a fantastic educative department. And for example, during the pandemic, everybody invested on screens with video, etc., etc. But here, on the contrary, the team decided to go and meet the school children in their schools because they were not allowed to come to visit us. So our team decided to go everywhere around Paris, even far away, and the team meet the schools, meet the children, the students where they were. And I think it was very smart, and it is still very smart, because you can't communicate on the same way thanks to a computer and when you are in live, like what we are today. In fact, my main project, our main project, is really to reinstall the museum, the permanent collection, because we are lucky. We receive fantastic donations thanks to Claude and France Le Mans from Lebanon and France, who gave to us more than 1,500 works of art. Many works are modern and contemporary. So thanks to this donation, we'll be able to rethink the whole installation, which is very important because in our installation now, we do not address important questions like colonization, decolonization, contemporary art, etc. So this donation is truly fantastic. So the main project I will have to lead is this reinstallation. Of course, with this reinstallation, there will be a financial campaign. And thanks to this financial campaign, I hope that we'll be able to redo and to renovate our educative spaces, because they are so important for me. I do think that we can't talk about cultural action without thinking about education and inclusion. And of course, the building needs a little bit of work. This facade, which has been built by Jean Nouvel in '91, has been considered as one of the most important 100 facades of the century, 20th century. And this facade is very special, totally unique, because each window, each moucharabier, donc reacted to the light, to the natural light. So Jean Nouvel, the architect who made the Louvre Abu Dhabi, in Abu Dhabi, and also other great projects in Alula, in Saudi Arabia, and many, many others, wanted to pay tribute to the Arabic architecture, donc with this game with shadows and lights. And you're right, it's a masterpiece. So the project of the new museum is masterpieces of Arabic art in an architectural masterpiece. The programming is a great question it's all about strategy. Obviously, there are much more ideas that what we can do in reality. Some ideas come from outside, some ideas are supported by the team. But after that, you have to make some choice, because it's not possible to make one exhibition every week. It's a question of balance between the budget, between the interest, and especially why it is relevant to make this subject, how this subject will talk to the whole society. So at the very end, the programming, especially for the exhibitions, is decided by the team, proposed to Jacques Lang, who also has a clear vision about what he wants with the Institut du Monde Arabe. It's a long process, but it is absolutely normal. And I would say that there are more ideas than what it is possible to make in reality. So we need to make some strategic choices. But for example, we do have right now a great exhibition about Lebanese art, Lights of Lebanon. It's a great exhibition about modern and contemporary art in Lebanon. And this exhibition was previously supposed to be mounted next year. But of course, because of the explosion last 4th of August 2020, our president, with our main donor, Claude Lemont, decided to make it earlier. And this is why it is right now on display. And this is a change we can easily understand because of the context. I hope so. I hope so. Well, because culture, in fact, is everything. Is not just a field which belongs to a ministry. Donc, culture is what we are, what defines us. And this is why it is so important now. It is why there are all those debates. I do think that culture cannot be evacuated from what we are. We are 100% cultural and 100% biological. We can't divide those two realities of what we are. Those debates about identities talk about culture. And because we are social animals, because we need to live together, those questions will remain very important. And I'm an evolutionist. So I do think that we learn each time we walk, and we learn, and we walk, and we learn. So it's a whole process. There is no recipe. There are opportunities, there are peoples, there are different perspectives, and life is mobility. So we need to continue to move because our glaze remain impermanent, even if we are studying permanent collection. This is why I don't like so much this concept of cancel culture. How it is possible to cancel culture? Because what our grandparents knew belong to history. Of course, there are things we need to change. But I would prefer to replace this notion of cancel culture with context culture. Context culture. Censorship does not educate. Censorship does not help, does not explain. We need to explain if we want to understand and if we want to really change things. So this is why learning history, learning the context is very important. Try to hide things without explaining, I don't think it is a good idea. So saying that we support the context is not that we legitimate the context, but it helps all of us to understand the complexity in order to make better decisions altogether. One example right now, you are in the Institut du Monde Arabe. We have an exhibition about Jews of Orient, thanks to Benjamin Stora, so it's a great scholar, sober, comprehensive exhibition. At the same time, we have a festival about Palestinian culture. So, of course, we need to explain that we envision and we gather among those different realities, and we do understand very much. But it works because it's all about context, once again. So it's step by step. I think that when we work with culture, we have a great strength, because art and culture just not talk to our brain, but also to our guts and our hearts. And this way of communicate is super efficient. This is a sensible communication. It's not just about the cognitive and intellectual knowledge. It's all about what we feel. And I'm very much interested by art therapy and museotherapy, by the way. When we see an artwork, concert, dance, painting, in fact, our brain receives this image, this information, as it is something alive. It's true. When you see a painting, a portrait, your brain analyzes the portrait as it would be a real person. This is neurology. And art and culture can explain difficult things, can spread very subtle messages, because art and culture talks to all kinds of cells, brain cells, and even body cells. So, working with art and culture in order to explain the complexity is a great tool. And this is why it's not just a question of books, of lessons, of scholarship. It's also a question of facing art, feeling art, because we are also animal. We are not robot. And we can't evacuate this aspect of who we are. In fact, this institute is supported by the Foreign Affairs Ministry. It's very special. And we do have a diplomat who works with us every day. So each time we are working with one country, etc., we are always exchanging with our diplomat, home diplomat, in-house diplomat. And I think that the art is also the diplomacy, is to find the way where you keep your values very strong, but also you interact and you work with people. For example, there is a subject I really want to support here, and which is approved by Jacques Lang, is all about the LGBT in the Arab world, here with an exhibition that we'll do next fall. So, of course, we're in France. We will display artists. Some of them can be displayed in their country, some others cannot. Some others live here in France or in other countries. And so this is our role and our mission. So it's all about, once again, value. What are the values you can defend? And of course, it's always in a very respectful way. It's very positive. The question is not to accuse, to condemn. No, it's to enlarge the spirit. It's not to replace one perspective, your perspective, by the other. It's just to have different perspectives, different blazes. So your vision is wider, is broader. And I think that this is our role. In fact, you're right, there are many events at IMA, frankly, almost every day. There are economical forums, all kinds of symposiums, lectures, conferences. Concerning IMA, there are some board meetings twice a year with representatives of different embassies here. The programming is presented, is voted, with Jacques Lang, the president, obviously. Then this institution welcomes all kind of important people, politicians, foreigners, whatever, whoever. So it's really a place to be, I would say, for the different representatives coming from the Arab world. Last week we welcomed the new female Palestinian museum director here, but we have all kinds of representatives, especially for the Jews of Orient, of course, the rabbin, the different from religious representatives came. So even the President Macron. It's true that this institution is not just in Paris, it's a little bit abroad. And I like this dimension, which is very unique. It is a very good question. In fact, the Algerian community is the most important from Africa. Yes, in France, definitely, definitely. So it's a very important community for us and in fact for all of us. I would say that what is important is not to have one flag for one project. So a project should talk to anybody. So this is my vision of what should be universal. Not saying that universalism is related to the 18th century Enlightenment. No. Universalism should be adapted by each of us. Benjamin Stora, from your country, don't say that. Certainly, this notion should be more modern or modernized, but it is still a very interesting notion because it is a federative notion. So a subject a good subject of exhibition should talk to anybody. This exhibition, for example, about Jews of Orient is not just for the Jewish community, but for the whole community. We'll have a specific year next year in 22 because this is a commemoration of the independence of Algeria after the Evian Agreement, les accords d'Evian, in 62. So it's a very important year. So we'll have many events through the whole year with different perspectives. And of course, those exhibitions, symposiums, lectures will talk to all kinds of people. And our history with Algeria is very different. When you talk to someone who stayed there or who came there after or before the war, those stories are very different because lives from one to one are very different. And this is what I want to say, is that each subject should talk to all of us. If not, it's not a good subject. It's all about teamwork. After that, it depends of the vision, which is supported by the leadership. It's true that for me, education has been always super important. And here, I really want to develop this department with the head of education. I would say that in any institution, the financial director is a key position, absolutely key position, because when we work in the cultural sector, we do invent projects. We don't really know what will be presented. We have ideas, we have visions, we work with artists. They have intentions, but at the very end, we don't really know exactly what will be the result And this is why it is so interesting to work in this cultural sector, because we always innovate, not just following a scientific process, but really a more intuitive process. And so this position of secretary, general secretary or financial director is very important, because we need to collaborate and to share the same confidence, because we don't really know what will be the success or not before. We have ideas, but it's not certain. Of course, when you work in an institution who have great collections, a great capital of work, I would say, like the Louvre, like Picasso, like the MoMA, etc., they can exchange works, they can sell exhibition for important fees. So the system is different. But in Montreal, the self-funding was very important, more than 50% of our budget. And it's exactly the same here, like more than 50%. So we really need to be successful. And I used to say, well, we have a few bullets, like every year, few exhibitions, and we need to have them in the right place, because if you have one exhibition which does not work, okay, it could be a disaster. So this is why, when I was in Montreal, and I hope it will be the same here, with the new museum and the educative department, when you support values around your institution, when you support education, inclusion, diversity, when people understand that your institution is good for the society, is good for all of us, even if they don't care about art, even if they don't like painting. They support your institution because they think that your institution has a true value, a genuine value for the whole community. And this is why it's not just a question of programming, it's not just a question of subject. We can't rely only on the event programming. We need to build this strong confidence based on our values, which should be the core business of your institution and your true motivation. After that, people just share their confidence and they support you because they know what you are doing for the community. I think that it's a great sector, because more and more countries are interested by their own heritage. We know, thanks to The Economist, that the number of museums exploded, from 95 to 2015. They more than tripled, maybe even more, through the world. And this appetite is still growing, because there are so many countries who also want to show their own heritage. You can see in Benin, in Africa, there are many new museums. And so I'm absolutely convinced that this sector will remain very, very strong, and especially because as we all belong to the same global community, we also need to know from where we are coming if we want to understand where we want to go all together. So I'm very optimistic, but I'm always very optimistic.
So thank you very much.
Merci à vous. Merci. Thank you.